Welcome to our new unit, the Civil War, America in Conflict. We got some amazing questions for this unit, so listen up. Here they are. How did a school teacher's invention that was meant to make slaves' jobs easier actually lead to more slavery? Sounds like a dumb invention. Why was Kansas bleeding and what made it stop? Can we get a Band-Aid here? Why did the election of Abraham Lincoln enrage the South? I'm guessing it was that whole hat and beard thing. It's kind of a turnoff. How did a need for shoes lead to the end of the Civil War? Did they have Nikes back then? If so, that explains a lot. Today we're going to get started with that teacher and his invention that actually led to more slavery in America. So, grab your snowshoes, get your walking stick, we're going to climb to the top of Mount Learn-A-Lot. Whoa, what a view. Today we are starting our new unit with a look at the difference between the North and the South. You see, the North and the South had really grown into two distinct cultures, with the North building large towns and factories, while the South was made up of large farms and plantations, with small towns, and the use of slave labor. These differences came about because of basic geography. As we learned in our unit in the original colonies, the southern states had thick, rich soil and long growing seasons, perfect for farming, while the northern states had thin, rocky soil and cold winters that made farming difficult. These differences would cause conflict between these two areas, with things like the Whiskey Rebellion, where the capital should be located, and of course, whether slavery should be allowed. Let's take a closer look at these two areas with just contrast. Today we are comparing the North with the South. What? You were expecting a head of lettuce? Alright, back then these two areas of the U.S. couldn't be more different than they were. First of all, the North had most of the population. In fact, the North had 71% of the population, while the South only had 29%. Infrastructure was another major difference between these two areas. The North had 72% of the country's railroad lines, while the South had only 28%. During the war, these railroad lines would be a huge help for the North, moving soldiers and supplies around. The number of factories was another major advantage for the North, which had 85% of the factories, which produced 92% of the iron and steel for the country. This would be a huge advantage in terms of producing weapons and supplies for the North. The South did have one advantage, which was farmland. The South had 84% of the nation's farmland compared to just 16% in the North. This meant the South could provide its own food and grew many of the raw materials that the North would need to keep its factories producing goods, including cotton, or king cotton as it was called in the South. And this brings us to that question about the teacher with an invention that actually led to more slavery in the South. You see, cotton was a crop that wasn't grown much back then because if you picked cotton, well, you also had to pick the seeds out of the cotton. This was time-consuming and made cotton very expensive to grow, as it would take many hours of work to clean the cotton and make it usable for cloth making. Eli Whitney was a teacher who came to a plantation to tutor the family's children. He observed slaves picking seeds from the cotton and got an idea for a machine that would clean the seeds more quickly with less time. He put together a box called the cotton gin. The cotton gin would have a compartment to put in the raw cotton and a cylinder inside with a comb on it. When you turn the crank, the cotton gin would produce clean cotton without the seeds. This would allow for much more cotton production than ever before. If you haven't noticed already, a lot of the clothes we wear today are made from cotton. With cotton more available than ever, demand went through the roof. This new invention made cotton the most profitable crop to grow in the world, and the southern states were perfect for growing it. This led to southern plantations almost being exclusively cotton plantations. If you had a plantation, why would you grow something that didn't make you the most money? This also led to more and more slaves being purchased to plant, harvest, and clean the cotton with Whitney's new invention. This also created a boom of textile factories in the North to turn this new abundance of cotton into fabric that could be made into clothes, sheets, curtains, etc. The difficult part of having a country with two completely different cultures came when trying to pass laws that were beneficial for both groups, especially when they disagreed about issues like taxes, the need for infrastructure, and of course, slavery. The system of federalism, where power is shared between the federal government and state governments, was one of the things that kept the North and South together up until the Civil War started. The idea is that states can do a better job of making laws that serve the people who live there better than the federal government can. So instead of making a law that allows or outlaws slavery across the entire nation, states could have laws that decide if slavery is allowed or not. This power of the states to decide their own laws is called states' rights. The Constitution says that states have any and all powers that are not given to the federal government in the Constitution. It also says that federal laws are more powerful than the state laws. Let's see if we can make this concept a little clearer with our What If segment. What if you were in a class of 100 people? I know, that'd be a pretty big class. It would also be hard for one teacher to control. So what if the teacher made groups of 10? Each group would have its own leader and be in charge of making sure that everyone in the group is working and behaving. Now the teacher might make some general rules like respect each other. People should be working on their projects. You should listen and not talk while the teacher talks, and maybe a few other rules. In your group, however, you might have your own rules, like people in the group must learn each other's names, split up work equally, and in group discussions only talk when they have the talking stick. So sometimes it gets a little confusing. Can I talk when the teacher is talking because I have the talking stick? Well, in this analogy, the teacher represents the federal government, and your group is the state. The teacher's rules are like the federal laws, and your group's rules are like the state laws. The rules for your group were custom tailored to the needs of your group's members, and the federal rules were meant to keep the class organized and working. Like I said earlier though, sometimes there are conflicts, like being able to talk when you have the talking stick in your group and the teacher's talking. In those cases, the federal laws or the teacher rules are enforced over the state or group rules. In other words, if your teacher asks you to stop talking while he is talking, you can't pull out the talking stick as an excuse for talking. That rule is only valid in your group, not in the whole class. Since our nation's beginnings, there have been times when states have said that if they don't like the law, they don't have to obey it. This has happened recently with laws about physician-assisted suicide and medical marijuana, where states allow things outlawed by the federal government. In these cases, federal law is still more important than the state law, but only if the president chooses or has the manpower to enforce those laws. Back then, in the 1800s and even the 1700s, states disagreed about the Alien and Sedition Acts, the tax on whiskey, and of course, slavery. Actually, one of the causes of the Civil War was even who the president was. This basic disagreement about whether states or the federal government had more power would turn out to be a major cause of the Civil War, as the South feared that the more populous North would use their control of Congress and the president to pass laws that would take away their way of life. So what? Well, after watching this video, you should be able to answer the following questions. What were the major differences between the North and the South before the Civil War? What did Eli Whitney's invention do, and how did it lead to more slavery in the South? And finally, what are states' rights, and how do they lead to conflicts between the North and the South? If you learned all that, then you learned what you needed to know. Tune in next time when we find out why Kansas was bleeding and what made it stop.